Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ask the Grant Writing Expert. I'm Meg Bouvier. You know me as the creator of the NIH course library that your organization subscribes to. I'm a neuroscientist turned NIH staff writer turned full-time NIH grant writer. I'm coming to you live from Western Massachusetts, where the weather has finally turned warm. So I finally climbed out of my turtlenecks, and now I'm nearly in a cardigan in late May. So that's New England for you. So I'm here as always to answer your questions. And just to remind anybody who's new here, you're in listen only mode. So what you want to do is look at the Q&A box. If you have a question you'd like to ask me about your specific set of circumstances or your submission, feel free to do that. You can type the questions in there. And if you have any comments that you'd like to add to any of the discussion that we're having, feel free to put that in the chat box. And today I'm going to be reviewing a number of things with you, and I wanted you guys to have access to certain URLs. So if you look in the chat box, you'll find a couple of URLs for some things that I'm hoping to discuss with you this week. So all right, so I think what we're going to do is begin with, well, first I want to begin by just reminding you, and I'm sure you guys are going to be sick of my saying this, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands. NIH recently extended its policy whereby they allow grantees for the cycle 2 deadlines, which are May to July, to submit preliminary data as post-submission material. So again, for those who don't know, post-submission material is a certain category of information that you can update by which you can update your application package. So after you upload, let's say, for example, you want to upload a video, or you want to update information about a publication that is, that had been submitted and is now in press. There's a window of time that begins after upload and ends 30 days before your study section meets. And during that period of time, you can update information, certain types of information about your application package. It's very easy to find information online about what kinds of information are allowable in that format. You can just do an internet search on NIH post-submission material policy, and that information will come up. And you can only upload information once, and it's limited to a single page of information. And during the pandemic, NIH has made an exception to their policy, and you can actually include preliminary data as some of the information that you will update. So again, this applies for deadlines in May through July. We don't yet know about the fall. NIH has been very late in releasing this information to people. I wish they would tell us sooner, because it really often is the deciding factor for some people about whether to apply for one cycle or delay to the next. But that's how it's been going these days. So anyway, just a reminder for people that that is the case, in case people have not been aware of that. Okay, so I am going to do a screen share. So hopefully everybody can see this. So this is, you're probably going to hear me talk a lot about NIAID's website. They are my absolute favorite when it comes to any kind of information that you're looking for. It used to be NCI years ago, but NIAID has far surpassed them. And whenever I need additional information, I come to the NIAID website. I think that they just are putting out great information. So this is, you'll find this in the chat box under NIAID sample grants. I think this is a terrific website. So here, you'll see that there are all kinds of sample grants. So the R01, everybody knows, the small format R03, the R15 area grant, the 6-page R21, the staged R21, R33, and then these are the SBIR, STTRs, the mentored K series, pre-award F, the cooperative agreement UO1. So lots of samples here. And there's also this, if you click this NIH sample forms, plans, letters, emails, etc. And there's all kinds of sample language here too. So this is a page I use all the time. So we're going to talk more about data sharing a little later, but there's sample just-in-time requests, all kinds of subaward information, other types of grant applications. So behavioral research grant application, that's a really good application for people to be able to view if they do behavioral work. That can be a very tricky thing to write for NIH review panels, so it can be very useful to look at that. There's a K99 sample here, biosketch samples, it just goes on and on, sample reference letters. These are all the standard, these here are the standard NIH websites for rigor and authentication, data sharing, leadership, multi-PI leadership plans. I mean, it just goes on and on. This is my absolute go-to. So this is also in the chat box. I think I put it under NIAID other samples. But for now, let's go back and take a look at these. So if you click on R01, you'll see there are lots of them. I just caution you because, for example, these are the newest ones. They're version Forms D. So there are, I think, 3 of them for the Forms D. And we're up to Forms G. So we're several form sets old in these samples. You can imagine that even anonymizing them, it can be very tricky to show people actual grant applications because this is all information that is unpublished. So it's very confidential. So typically, you know, again, we're in Forms G. NIH is not going to show anything from Forms G for years. So these can be useful, but I show them to you with the caveat that they're somewhat outdated. So, you know, these are a number of years old and they get older. So it's version C, it kind of goes down from there, you know, like, so you got to be careful about changes to the scoring criteria. But if you are careful about that and you keep that in mind, these can be very useful information. So this particular one at the top is actually an A1. It's a resubmission application. So you can go in and look at the summary statements. So it's very useful for people to be able to look at a summary statement. So probably most of you have seen these, but this is the grantee's name, where they come from, the study section it went to, the meeting, the SRG meeting date, the study section meeting date, the council meeting date, which is the secondary review where the award is actually made, the RFA that was requested, and then their impact score and their percentile. So you can see percentile 1%, they scored at the top of their study section. And then it goes on from there where you can read the resume and summary of discussion and get a sense of, you know, what the scores were like. And typically for people to get into the funding range, you usually want mostly 1s and a few 2s in these scores, just so that people are aware. So if you were to scroll down a little further to page 39, that's where the text itself, this is the full submission package. So you're actually looking at the form set here. So if you scroll down, you can look at the introduction and how they formatted the response. This wouldn't be my preferred way to format, but it was obviously successful for this grantee. So I actually recommend a somewhat different strategy. But that's for another time, because that's not what we're discussing today. What we are discussing today is how to write the summary and narrative. So as a sample, I worked from this specific Ames page, because in order to write the project summary and narrative, I always start with a final specific Ames page. So what are these sections? So the summary, project summary, is a 30-line maximum summary. 30 lines at 11-point font using one of the recommended fonts, 1/2-inch margin. And the project narrative is maximum of 3 sentences, and it's meant for a lay audience. I find that my grantees tend to spend days writing these things, and I got to tell you, reviewers don't read them. So this is not a good use of your time if you're on deadline. So very typically, reviewers never look at them, and I suspect that they're actually working their way into appropriations reports for staffers, because it's the kind of stuff that I would have put into my appropriations reports and summary reports to council and things like that. So it's not a good use of your time. But having said that, you do have to write them. So let me give you a few pointers about how to do that. So as I said, I always start with a specific aims page. You'll see that their version is not single spaced. So that's the first thing I would change, is to make it single spaced, because you never want to sacrifice space to argue on behalf of your project. The other thing is that their version is justified to the right margin, which is just a pet peeve of mine. The odd spacing that results between words, it's not a sophisticated program in Word, so you get weird spacing between the words when you justify to the left and right margin. It causes me headache. So, and I know a lot of reviewers who agree, so I always change it. Anyhow, typically when I'm writing a project summary, I would come in here and start with the draft specific aims page. And what you want to do, because this is actually, if you get funded, it's going to appear in the reporter website. So you don't want to give away a lot of detail, because that's publicly accessible from the time you're funded. So what I usually do is start by stripping out all the detail about the aims. Take all that out. You don't want to reveal that to other people. So that's the first thing I do. I usually remove any bold as well, because that takes up space. And then I usually just run everything end to end, which is how it typically appears in the database, in the reporter database. And if I do that, in this particular instance, I'm already below 30 lines. If I weren't, if this had been a sample where it was still 35 or 40 lines, I would probably come in here and leave all the stuff about the background, the clinical need, if it's a clinical project, the knowledge gap, the significance of the project, what's innovative of the project. And what I typically strip out next after the details of the aims is any mention of preliminary data, especially if it's unpublished. I take all of that out so that there's nothing proprietary or sensitive that's being uploaded to the reporter website. So once you've gotten below your 30 lines, you want to come and write the project narrative. So the first sentence is usually some sort of disease burden or knowledge gap or clinical need. It's usually something around the beginning of your background section. So it might be something like this. Most chronic bacterial infections are caused by biofilms, aggregated bacteria that are embedded in a matrix of polymer or protein, something that's like a statement of what the problem is. Then the next sentence, I usually do a we propose type sentence. So wherever that might be in the application, there's usually, or here, like a long-term goal is to find new strategies for remediating biofilm infections by addressing biophysical properties. So that might be a good one. And I think we said the disease burden one was here. And then your last one is whatever the impact is. So you want to look somewhere, there's hopefully an impact statement somewhere in here. They may not actually have one, but you could come up here and use this objective statement. and make that your third sentence. So, and you would of course take these out. You wouldn't, these are just my instructions, and you would run these end to end. That's literally the amount of time you should be spending on this. If you are spending more than 30 to 60 minutes on writing these, you've taken a wrong turn. This is not a good use of your time, because this is not stuff that reviewers are going to look closely at. You have to do it in order to complete your application package. This is not the place to spend a lot of time and energy. So you can just follow these, work from the specific aims page, whittle it down to 30 lines for your summary, taking out details of the project and your preliminary data, because it's all going to be publicly available on the reporter website once you're funded. And then with the project narrative, just stripping this information out. One other slight little factoid while we're here: this is not a proposal, it is an application. So this is like a little known factoid about NIH, but the words proposal and application are not synonymous at NIH. It's a grant application and a contract proposal. So at NIH, there's no such thing as a grant proposal. Just a little factoid. Not going to be make or break in terms of your funding, but anyway, just so you know. Okay, so moving along, the next thing, do people have any questions about that? Let me make sure we're not getting any questions as I'm chugging along here with this information. So again, I see that more people have logged on in the last however many minutes. So if you have questions, you're in listen only mode. So if you have questions, go ahead and type them in the chat box. And if you have comments you want to add, questions in the Q&A box and comments in the chat box. So feel free to weigh in on anything that we're discussing. The other thing that I wanted to point out to you is that NIH just released this new data sharing website, and I think it's fantastic. I'm recommending it to all of my applicants. I get a lot of questions from grant applicants about how to handle the resource sharing plan and the data sharing plan and what to put in it. And so NIH has created this really lovely website, which they just released. So there's all kinds of information about different topics, scientific data, genomic data, research tools, model organisms, people doing clinical trials, and resource highlights down here. So I love this website. The information is all in the chat box, the URL. And I'm just going to pause here before I go on, because I do have, let's see. Okay, this is unrelated to this, so I'm just going to finish this thought and then start to answer some questions. So, okay, the other thing that I wanted to show you is, of course, NIAID has a beautiful version of a resource sharing plan, which they've always had. This is not new. So anytime you're looking for samples or detailed information or really good solid instructions or anything like that, your best bet is to go to NIAID. So here they have beautiful samples for model organisms and all different, information. A lot of it, they say it's specific to NIAID, but I can tell you that a lot of the samples that they share would be entirely appropriate to anybody who is applying at NIH. So, all right, so let's leave that up. And I see we have a couple of questions here. So actually, I'll do that. Okay, so the first question is, once you have your summary statement, what's the best way to get a response from the PO? An unresponsive PO pre-submission. I have one responsive PO who is happy to share her thoughts and comes prepared to our submission meetings, but another one who ignored all my pre-submission emails. Yep. So of course, there are POs who are responsive and those who aren't. The other thing is that sometimes you're contacting them during super busy deadline periods, so they're not going to be as responsive during those times. So For example, this is May 25th as we're doing this call, and I can tell you that a lot of my grantees are getting their summary statements back. They're wanting to start to think and strategize about what to do on their upcoming, resubmission. And a lot of program officers are absolutely swamped with questions for June applications. So if you're emailing them now about a resubmission for November, you're not going to get an answer. I can tell you that. It's the same for me as somebody who works full-time as an NIH grant writer. If somebody were to email me right now, and I have people doing this saying, I'd love to strategize about a November A1, I'll talk to you at the end of June. Like that's not going to happen this month. So it may be in part when you're asking them for information. But even so, of course, we all know there are some program officers who are just not terribly responsive. They're just not particularly good. Typically what I recommend people do, and you all have access to the library, I'll direct you to my Master the Resubmissions course. The beginning part of it talks a lot about strategy and how to approach the program officer. But in brief, I would say that what you want to do is make a comprehensive list of all of the critiques you got in the summary statements, and think about what your response would be. Group the ones that are similar, because often all three reviewers will say something similar about a lack of preliminary data. You don't need to list that 3 times. Just group things by theme or topic or whatever, and then how you're going to respond to it. And then send the summary statements to the program officer, and you could send them a draft 1-page introduction to the revised application where you list a critique and you state how you're going to respond to it. And then email them and say, my team and I have spent some time digesting the reviewer comments, and we have a draft to the introduction, and we've attached both of those here. We'd love a brief conversation with you at your earliest convenience to get your take on it and see if you feel that we're being responsive to the critiques. If it was discussed at a study section, you could also say, we're eager to hear your take on the discussion at the study section meeting, because sometimes whoever writes the summary of that discussion, maybe their version of what the key topics were at that discussion are not consistent with what the program officer would say. I've had that happen many times. Where a grantee reaches out to a program officer and says, my read of the summary statements is that this is the key point that they really got stuck on. And the PO says, that's not what really happened in the room. Here's what I think was the key point that they got stuck on. And whatever that point is, isn't prominently featured in the summary statement. So you could also ask for that. But they're going to respond if they're going to respond. And if they're just one of those program officers who's not terribly helpful or is swamped or whatever, you may be out of luck. So you got to hope that you got one that will answer. Also, give them a little grace. Right now, people are going through things, family members get COVID, kids are home from daycare. So, keep at them. Email over a period of weeks and just see if you can get a hold of them. So hopefully that answers that question. The next one is the URL do not seem to be in the chat box, just a heads up. So I am going to ask Erin to take a look and see. I thought I had put it so that, let's see, me to everyone. New NIH data sharing website, NIAID website and sample. Are you looking above where the welcome is? So it does say that there are comments that were made to everybody. So maybe Erin can help troubleshoot that a little bit with you. Okay, so another question I got during the week that I wanted to answer, a grantee asked me, do I have to name a statistician or is to be determined okay? I'm just gonna grab a tissue while we're talking. I'm in the middle of allergy season here. So The question of how to handle the statistician on your application is one that I'm pretty passionate about. So your statistician should be key personnel. So I think it's a really bad idea to have that person be, in general, I will say you want to avoid saying to be determined for anybody, unless, like some FOAs say you don't have to name your advisory committee members at the time of application, then don't name them. But for somebody like a biostatistician who should be key personnel, they should be a COI with percent effort. That person, not only should they be named, but you should have a bio sketch for them, and they should be assisting you with the preparation of the application itself. So they should be doing things like your power calculations, your sample size calculations, things like that, as you prepare the application. So I feel really strongly that of all things, you should not have the biostatistician to be determined. And in fact, really nobody should be, unless they're a pretty minor player like a research assistant, or if your FOA says you don't have to name your advisory committee members right now, that kind of thing. Okay, so I'm hoping that people are able to, did we get that squared away about being able to see the URLs in the chat box? Hopefully that is squared away. It's above the welcome email because I logged on early to do them. So Erin, can you repost them for me in these last few minutes? I don't want to spend my time doing that because I have a few more questions to answer. I'm assuming that you can see them and repost them. Okay, so two other questions I got. One of them was, can you have a URL in a research strategy? And the answer is no. According to SF 424, you should not have URLs in any page limited sections of federal grant applications except the biosketch. Now, it is true that NIH has been somewhat lenient about this in the past, but last fall, I think it was, they issued a notice saying that they were going to begin to crack down on this and start to disqualify applications that used URLs in page limited sections. And the problem is it doesn't yield an error message. So you don't know if you've left one in there, you're not going to get an error message when you upload. So that's kind of problematic because you wouldn't want it to be flagged and disqualified later on. A little bit related to that, another question I got was, are figures allowed on the Ames page? And I will say that I am getting mixed information about this from my grantees. So I have a number of grantees in different organizations around the country who have told me unequivocally that they are getting error messages when they upload when there's a figure on the Ames page. And if they remove the figure, it goes through fine. And simultaneously, I have grantees from the last several cycles from different organizations around the country using different platforms to go to grants.gov saying the opposite, that they have included a figure on their Ames page and it went through no problem and it went through review and everything was kosher. So do with that what you will. I don't know what to make of it, but there's nothing in SF 424 that says that you can have a figure on the Ames page. But having said that, if you feel really strongly about doing it, you may just want to upload a few days early so that if you do run into problems, you can rejig it and take the figure out and maybe put it at the beginning of the approach section. So any other questions in these last few minutes? I think that we now have, okay, it looks like Erin is going to resend, she's going to email you guys with the URLs. I'm not sure why those didn't post, but our apologies for that. And so I want to just wrap up by saying there are probably a couple of courses that would be useful for you guys to watch as we're heading into these final weeks. I would suggest that probably The checklist to avoid top mistakes would be a really good one for you guys to watch. So all of you have access to the full library of courses. So as you're coming into the final week or two, as you're getting ready to upload, and I know not everybody has a June 5th deadline, but as you're coming into the home stretch, you might want to just look at that course checklist to avoid top mistakes. It is literally a checklist, and it's grouped by, prep, writing, strategy, things like that. And you can just run the checklist against your application. The other one for people who are writing A1s, because I know there are some of you out there as well, I would suggest watching master resubmissions. The course I have there, I think it's about an hour and 20 minutes. So, and I think that's all we have time for today. I hope that you guys found this helpful. It looks like we'll be emailing you the URLs that I mentioned today. Thank you so much for attending, and good luck with your NIH grant writing. Have a great day.